What if I told you that 12 people vanished into thin air on the most famous highway in America, and their fate remained hidden beneath our feet for 20 years? Stay until the end, because what they found in that hatch will change everything you think you know about Route 66. This is the true story of the Harmony Baptist Church Choir from Millfield, Kansas. On July 15, 1983, they set out on what should have been a simple weekend retreat to California. They never made it past mile marker 247, but in 2003, during a routine renovation of Murphy's gas station, workers discovered something that turned this cold case into America's most disturbing highway mystery. If stories like this fascinate you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what we uncover next. I've been investigating cold cases along America's highways for over 15 years, but nothing prepared me for what I discovered about the Harmony Baptist Church Choir. When I first heard about their disappearance, it seemed like just another tragic story from Route 66's darker history. 12 people don't just vanish from the face of the earth, especially not on one of the most traveled highways in the country. But as I dug deeper into the case files, interviewed witnesses, and pieced together the events of that scorching July weekend in 1983, I realized this wasn't just another missing persons case. This was something far more sinister, something that would shake the foundations of a small Kansas community and reveal secrets that had been buried for 2 decades beneath concrete and asphalt. My fascination with this case began 3 years ago, when I was researching material for a book about unsolved mysteries along Route 66. I had compiled dozens of stories about missing travelers, unexplained accidents, and strange phenomena reported by truckers and tourists over the decades. But the Harmony Baptist Church Choir case stood out from all the others. It wasn't just the number of people involved, though 12 simultaneous disappearances was certainly unprecedented. It was the complete absence of any evidence, any trail, any logical explanation for how an entire church choir could simply cease to exist on one of America's most traveled highways. I spent months tracking down surviving family members, former investigators, and anyone who might have information about the case. What I discovered was a web of unanswered questions that seemed to grow more complex with each new piece of evidence I uncovered. The more I learned about the individual choir members, their backgrounds, and the circumstances surrounding their disappearance, the more convinced I became that this wasn't a random crime of opportunity. Someone had planned this carefully, methodically, with a knowledge of Route 66 and its hidden secrets that went far beyond what any casual observer would possess. The story begins in Millfield, Kansas, a town that exemplified the American heartland in all its modest glory and quiet desperation. With a population of 1,247 people, according to the 1980 census, Millfield was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where the biggest news of the week might be a new stop sign or a minor fender bender in the Walmart parking lot. The town had been founded in 1887 by German immigrants who came to Kansas seeking cheap farmland and the promise of a better life. For nearly a century, Millfield had thrived as a small agricultural community, its economy built around wheat farming, cattle ranching, and the handful of businesses that served the surrounding rural area. But by 1983, Millfield was struggling with the same economic pressures that were squeezing small towns across the Midwest. Family farms were consolidating into larger corporate operations. Young people were leaving for opportunities in Kansas City or Denver, and Main Street was slowly emptying as businesses closed or relocated to strip malls on the highway. The town's population had been declining steadily for over a decade, and there was a palpable sense that Millfield's best days were behind it. In this environment of gradual decline and quiet desperation, the Harmony Baptist Church served as one of the few sources of community pride and hope. The Harmony Baptist Church sat on the corner of Main and Elm, occupying a lot that had housed a church building of one denomination or another since 1891. The current structure was built in 1952, a modest white frame building with a simple wooden cross and stained glass windows that caught the morning sun just right during Sunday service. The church could seat about 120 people, though it rarely held more than 60 or 70 on any given Sunday. Pastor William Hartley had been leading the congregation since 1978, having arrived in Millfield fresh out of seminary and full of enthusiasm for small-town ministry. Pastor Hartley was 34 years old in 1983, a soft-spoken man with thinning brown hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had grown up in suburban Kansas City, the son of an insurance salesman and a homemaker, and his decision to enter the ministry had surprised his family almost as much as his choice to serve in a tiny rural church rather than seeking a position in a larger, more prestigious congregation. But Hartley had felt called to small-town ministry, drawn by the opportunity to know every member of his congregation personally and to serve a community where his work could make a real difference in people's lives. What made Harmony Baptist special wasn't its architecture or its small but dedicated congregation, it was their choir. The Harmony Baptist Church Choir had gained a reputation throughout the tri-state area for their haunting harmonies and powerful gospel performances. They weren't professionals, just ordinary people who found something extraordinary when they sang together. Pastor Hartley had assembled this group over 5 years, carefully selecting voices that complemented each other in ways that seemed almost supernatural. He had a good ear for music, having played piano since childhood, and he understood how different vocal ranges and timbres could combine to create something greater than the sum of their parts. The choir rehearsed every Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock sharp, gathering in the church sanctuary to practice the songs they would perform on Sunday morning. But their reputation had grown beyond the walls of Harmony Baptist, and they were frequently invited to perform at other churches, community events, and special occasions throughout the region. Their repertoire included traditional hymns, contemporary Christian songs, and spirituals that dated back to the earliest days of American gospel music. When they sang together, their voices seemed to transcend the modest surroundings of their small-town church, creating an atmosphere of transcendence that moved even the most cynical listeners to tears. Margaret Chen was the choir's lead soprano, a 42-year-old schoolteacher whose voice possessed a clarity and power that seemed impossible for someone of her small stature. She stood barely 5 feet tall and weighed perhaps 110 pounds soaking wet. But when she opened her mouth to sing, the sound that emerged was nothing short of miraculous. Margaret had been born in San Francisco to Chinese immigrants who had fled the Communist Revolution, and her family had moved to Kansas when she was 10 years old, after her father found work as an engineer for Boeing in Wichita. She had met her husband, Robert, while studying education at Kansas State University, and they had moved to Millfield in 1975 when Robert took a job teaching high school mathematics. Margaret taught 3rd grade at Millfield Elementary School, where she was beloved by students and parents alike for her patience, creativity, and the way she could make even the most reluctant learner feel special and capable. She had been trying to have children for over a decade, suffering through 3 miscarriages and countless medical consultations that offered no clear answers or hope. Her involvement with the church choir had become a source of solace and purpose during these difficult years, providing an outlet for emotions too complex for words. When Margaret sang, she poured all of her longing, her faith, and her pain into the music, creating performances that left audiences emotionally drained and spiritually uplifted. David Kowalski provided the choir's bass foundation, his deep, resonant voice serving as the bedrock upon which the other voices built their harmonies. At 38 years old, David was Millfield's only full-time mechanic, operating a small garage on the edge of town where he repaired cars, trucks, and farm equipment for customers from a 50-mile radius. He was a big man, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall with hands the size of dinner plates and arms thick as tree trunks from years of physical labor. His appearance was intimidating to those who didn't know him, but David possessed a gentle soul and a generous spirit that made him one of the most respected members of the community. David had grown up in Milwaukee as the son of Polish immigrants, learning his trade from his father, who had operated a similar garage in the industrial heart of Wisconsin. He had served 2 tours in Vietnam as a combat engineer, experiences that had left him with nightmares he rarely discussed, and a deep appreciation for the simple pleasures of small-town life. He had moved to Kansas in 1972 after his discharge from the Army, drawn by the promise of cheap land and the opportunity to start fresh in a place where nobody knew about the things he had seen and done in Southeast Asia. His wife, Linda, was a nurse at the regional hospital in Garden City, and they had 2 teenage sons who helped out in the garage during summer vacations. David's involvement with the church choir had begun almost by accident when Pastor Hartley overheard him humming while working on the church's ancient pickup truck. The pastor had been amazed by the rich, powerful bass voice that emerged from the big mechanic, and he had convinced David to join the choir despite his protests that he wasn't the church-going type. David's voice added a depth and richness to the choir's sound that elevated their performances from merely good to truly exceptional. When he sang the low notes in "How Great Thou Art" or "Amazing Grace," his voice seemed to come from somewhere deep in the earth, creating a foundation of sound that made the other voices soar. The youngest member of the choir was 17-year-old Sarah Manning, a high school senior whose clear, innocent voice served as the perfect counterpoint to the more seasoned singers. Sarah was the only child of Tom and Beverly Manning, born when her parents were in their late 30s and had given up hope of having children. She had been the center of her parents' world from the moment she drew her first breath, showered with love and attention that had shaped her into a confident, talented young woman with dreams that extended far beyond the borders of Millfield, Kansas. Sarah stood 5 feet 6 inches tall with long blonde hair that she wore in a variety of styles depending on her mood, bright blue eyes that sparkled with intelligence and curiosity, and a smile that could light up the darkest room. She was an honor student, editor of the school newspaper, and captain of the debate team. Her teachers consistently praised her writing ability, her critical thinking skills, and her natural leadership qualities. She'd been accepted to the University of Kansas with a partial scholarship, planning to major in journalism with dreams of eventually working for a major newspaper or television network. But it was Sarah's voice that truly set her apart from her peers. She had been singing since she could barely talk, and her parents had recognized her exceptional talent early on. They had arranged for voice lessons with a retired opera singer in Garden City, driving the 60-mile round trip twice a week for 3 years to nurture their daughter's gift. Sarah's voice had a purity and emotional resonance that seemed impossible for someone so young, and when she sang, she could make even the most familiar hymns sound fresh and moving. She had been invited to audition for several college music programs, but her heart was set on journalism, viewing her musical ability as a wonderful gift rather than a career path. The oldest member of the choir was 81-year-old Florence Murphy, whose weathered hands could barely hold her hymnal, but whose alto voice carried decades of faith and experience. Florence had been born in 1902 in a sod house on the Kansas prairie, the daughter of homesteaders who had claimed their 160 acres under the Homestead Act and spent their lives trying to coax a living from the unforgiving soil. She had lived through the Great Depression, 2 world wars, the Dust Bowl, and countless personal tragedies that would have broken a lesser person, but her faith had never wavered, and her voice had never lost its power to comfort and inspire. Florence stood barely 5 feet tall and weighed less than 100 pounds, her body bent with arthritis and her face lined with the evidence of 8 decades of hard living. But when she sang, Her voice carried a depth of emotion and spiritual authority that commanded respect from listeners half her age. She had been widowed twice, outlived 3 of her 4 children, and buried more friends than she cared to count. Yet she approached each day with a gratitude and optimism that amazed everyone who knew her. Her involvement with the church choir was one of the greatest joys of her life, providing a connection to the community and a way to share the faith that had sustained her through so many trials. The other members of the choir each brought their own unique voices and life experiences to the group. There was James Butler, a 45-year-old insurance agent whose tenor voice added brightness and clarity to the upper harmonies. James had moved to Millfield from Chicago in 1979 after a messy divorce left him seeking a fresh start in a place where nobody knew about his failures and disappointments. He was a quiet, introspective man who found solace in music and community service, volunteering with the local food bank and serving as treasurer for several civic organizations. Ruth Stevenson was a 53-year-old widow whose rich mezzo-soprano voice provided a bridge between the higher and lower voices in the choir. She had lost her husband in a farming accident 5 years earlier and had thrown herself into church activities as a way of coping with her grief and loneliness. Ruth worked as a bookkeeper for several local businesses, her attention to detail and mathematical skills making her invaluable to small-town entrepreneurs who couldn't afford full-time accounting services. She lived alone in the house she had shared with her husband for 27 years, finding comfort in familiar routines and the support of her church family. Thomas Gray was a 62-year-old retired farmer whose baritone voice added warmth and stability to the choir's middle range. He had worked his family's 640-acre spread for over 40 years before selling out to a larger operation and moving into town with his wife, Eleanor. The transition from active farming to retirement had been difficult for Thomas, who had defined himself by his work and his connection to the land. Joining the church choir had given him a new sense of purpose and community, and he approached his musical responsibilities with the same dedication and attention to detail that had made him a successful farmer. Eleanor Gray, Thomas's wife of 38 years, sang alto alongside Florence Murphy, her steady, reliable voice providing harmonic support that allowed the more adventurous singers to take risks and explore the emotional depths of the music. Eleanor was a practical woman who had spent her adult life managing a farm household, raising 4 children, and supporting her husband through the inevitable ups and downs of agricultural life. She was known throughout the community for her cooking, her quilting, and her ability to organize any event with military precision and attention to detail. Michael Rodriguez was a 28-year-old teacher at the local high school whose tenor voice brought a contemporary sensibility to the choir's traditional repertoire. He had grown up in East Los Angeles, the son of Mexican immigrants who had worked in the fields and factories of California to provide their children with opportunities they had never had. Michael had earned a degree in education from UCLA and had come to Kansas as part of a program designed to bring qualified teachers to rural areas facing shortages. He taught Spanish and English as a second language, working with the growing number of Hispanic families who had come to Millfield seeking work in agriculture and food processing. Patricia Williams was a 36-year-old nurse at the regional medical clinic whose soprano voice added brightness and energy to the choir's upper range. She was a single mother, raising 2 young children, having left an abusive marriage 3 years earlier, and rebuilt her life from scratch in a community that welcomed her without judgment or prying questions. Patricia worked long hours at the clinic, often serving as the primary medical care provider for families who couldn't afford to travel to larger cities for treatment. Her involvement with the church choir was one of the few activities she allowed herself outside of work and motherhood, providing a creative outlet and a source of adult friendship that she desperately needed. The final member of the choir was Dr. Richard Hendricks, a 70-year-old retired physician whose bass voice complemented David Kowalski's in creating the foundation for the choir's harmonic structure. Dr. Hendricks had served as Millfield's only doctor for over 30 years before retiring in 1981, delivering babies, treating injuries, and providing comfort to families during their darkest hours. He was a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and a gentle manner that had made him beloved by generations of patients. His wife had died of cancer 2 years earlier, and his involvement with the church choir had become a way of remaining connected to the community he had served for so long. These 12 individuals had found something magical when they came together to sing. Their voices blended in ways that seemed to transcend their individual limitations and create something greater than the sum of their parts. They weren't just a church choir. They were a family bound together by music, faith, and a shared commitment to using their gifts in service of something larger than themselves. When they performed, audiences didn't just hear beautiful music. They experienced a sense of transcendence that lingered long after the last note had faded away. Pastor Hartley had worked tirelessly to develop the choir's repertoire and performance skills, but he understood that what made them special couldn't be taught or learned through practice alone. There was an intangible quality to their music, a spiritual dimension that seemed to emerge naturally when these particular voices came together in harmony. He had seen grown men weep during their performance of "How Great Thou Art," and witnessed skeptics leave church services with tears in their eyes and questions in their hearts about the existence of something greater than themselves. The choir's reputation had spread throughout the region, and they were frequently invited to perform at other churches, community events, and special occasions. They had sung at weddings and funerals, high school graduations and holiday celebrations, always bringing the same level of preparation and emotional commitment that made their performances memorable. They had recorded a simple cassette tape of their favorite hymns, selling copies to raise money for church missions and community outreach programs. The recording was rough around the edges, made with borrowed equipment in the church sanctuary, but it captured something essential about their sound that touched listeners' hearts. In the spring of 1983, Pastor Hartley received an invitation that would change everything for the Harmony Baptist Church Choir. The annual Gospel Festival in Barstow, California, was one of the most prestigious events of its kind in the western United States, featuring choirs and gospel groups from across the country. The festival organizers had heard about the Harmony Baptist Church Choir through word of mouth and recordings that had somehow made their way to California, and they were inviting the group to perform on the main stage during the Sunday evening finale. For a small-town church choir from Kansas, this invitation was the opportunity of a lifetime. The Gospel Festival was broadcast on Christian radio networks throughout the western states, and performing there would put the Harmony Baptist Church Choir on the national map. It would validate years of hard work and dedication, providing recognition for the unique gift they shared with their community. More importantly, it would give them a platform to share their faith and their music with a much larger audience, fulfilling what Pastor Hartley believed was their divine calling. The invitation came with challenges, however. Barstow, California, was over 200 miles from Millfield, Kansas, requiring a long drive across some of the most desolate stretches of highway in America. The festival organizers could provide modest honorariums for travel expenses, but the choir members would need to cover most of the costs themselves, including gas, food, and accommodations. For people living on teachers' salaries, retirement incomes, and small-town wages, this represented a significant financial commitment. Pastor Hartley called a special meeting of the choir to discuss the invitation and determine whether they could make the trip work financially and logistically. The meeting was held on a Wednesday evening in May 1983 in the church sanctuary where they rehearsed each week. As the 12 choir members gathered in their usual seats, Pastor Hartley could see the excitement and apprehension in their faces. They all understood what this opportunity meant, but they also recognized the challenges they would face in making it happen. Margaret Chen was the first to speak, her voice trembling with emotion as she expressed what they were all feeling. "This is what we've been working toward," she said, tears forming in her eyes. "This is our chance to share what God has given us with people who might never hear it otherwise. We have to find a way to make this work." Her words seemed to crystallize the group's feelings, and one by one, the other choir members voiced their commitment to making the trip, regardless of the financial sacrifice required. David Kowalski offered to drive his large van if the church's vehicle wasn't suitable for the long journey. Dr. Hendricks volunteered to help with medical emergencies that might arise during the trip. Florence Murphy, despite her age and limited income, insisted on contributing what she could to help younger members who might not be able to afford the full cost. The sense of unity and shared purpose that had always characterized the choir was evident as they worked together to solve the practical problems of getting 12 people from Kansas to California and back. Pastor Hartley spent the next several weeks organizing the trip with the same attention to detail he brought to all his responsibilities. He secured the church van, a white 1979 Ford Econoline that was showing its age but had been well maintained by David Kowalski. He mapped out the route along Route 66, identifying gas stations, restaurants, and motels that would accommodate their group. He made reservations at modest but clean accommodations, carefully managing the limited budget to ensure they could make the trip without putting undue financial strain on any choir member. The route Pastor Hartley planned would take them west from Millfield through Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and into California, following the historic path of Route 66 that had carried millions of Americans toward new opportunities and fresh starts. It was a journey that would cover 1,247 miles and take approximately 20 hours of driving time, not including stops for gas, food, and rest. They planned to leave early Friday morning and arrive in Barstow by Saturday evening, giving them a full day to rest and prepare before their Sunday evening performance. As the departure date approached, excitement in the church and the broader Millfield community reached fever pitch. This was the biggest thing to happen to their small town in years, and everyone wanted to be part of the send-off. Local businesses donated money to help with travel expenses. The high school photography club offered to document the departure. The Millfield Gazette ran a front-page story about the choir's invitation to perform in California, complete with individual photographs and biographical sketches of each member. Sarah Manning wrote an article about the upcoming trip for her high school newspaper, describing the months of preparation and the significance of the opportunity for both the choir and the community. Her article captured the sense of pride and anticipation that had gripped Millfield as the departure date approached. "This is our chance to show the world that small-town Kansas has something special to offer," she wrote. "When we sing in California, we'll be representing not just our church, but our entire community. We won't let you down." The choir held a special farewell concert on the Sunday evening before their departure, performing for a packed sanctuary that included members from other churches throughout the region who had come to hear them one final time before their California debut. The performance was emotionally charged, with several choir members struggling to maintain their composure as they sang songs that had special meaning for them and their community. The evening concluded with their signature version of "Amazing Grace," performed without instrumental accompaniment, their voices rising in perfect harmony toward the wooden rafters of the modest church building. Florence Murphy's voice was particularly powerful that evening, her alto line weaving through the familiar melody with a poignancy that seemed to acknowledge both the joy of the opportunity ahead and the uncertainty of what the future might hold. When the song ended, the sanctuary was silent for several moments before erupting in sustained applause that seemed to go on forever. Many in the audience were wiping away tears, moved by the beauty of the music and the knowledge that they were witnessing something truly special. After the service, family members and friends gathered in the church fellowship hall for a potluck dinner that served as an informal farewell celebration. The tables were laden with covered dishes representing the best of Kansas home cooking: fried chicken, meatloaf, green bean casserole, cornbread, and enough desserts to feed twice as many people. The conversation was animated, with everyone offering advice for the journey ahead, sharing memories of past choir performances, and expressing their excitement about the upcoming California debut. Margaret Chen's husband, Robert, had prepared a detailed weather forecast for the route, noting that temperatures would be hot but manageable, with no precipitation expected along their path. David Kowalski had spent the previous week going over every inch of the church van, checking fluid levels, testing the air conditioning, and ensuring that the vehicle was ready for the long journey ahead. Dr. Hendricks had assembled a comprehensive first aid kit and prepared a list of medical contacts along their route in case of emergencies. As the evening wound down, Pastor Hartley called the choir members together for a final prayer circle in the sanctuary. They stood in their usual formation, holding hands as they had done countless times before rehearsals and performances, but this time felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a sense that they were on the threshold of something significant that would change their lives and their understanding of their place in the world. Pastor Hartley's prayer was simple but heartfelt, asking for safe travels, successful performances, and the opportunity to share their gifts with new audiences who might be touched by their music. He thanked God for bringing these 12 individuals together, for blessing them with voices that could create something beautiful when combined in harmony, and for providing them with this unexpected opportunity to represent their faith and their community on a larger stage. The prayer concluded with the Lord's Prayer, recited in unison by voices that had learned to blend seamlessly over 5 years of weekly rehearsals and countless performances. As they said Amen together, there was a sense of completion, as if this moment marked the end of one chapter in their lives and the beginning of another. They made final arrangements to meet at the church parking lot at 6 a.m. sharp on Friday, July 15th, for the journey that would take them into American history and legend. On the morning of July 15th, 1983, 12 members of the Harmony Baptist Church Choir gathered in the church parking lot at exactly 6 a.m., just as they had planned. The temperature was already climbing toward what would become a record-breaking 98-degree day, but their spirits were high despite the early hour and the long journey ahead. The previous evening's farewell dinner had left everyone feeling energized and supported, ready to tackle the 1,247-mile drive to California with enthusiasm and determination. Families had come to see them off, despite the early hour. Margaret Chen's husband, Robert, was there with his camera, taking what would be the last photographs ever taken of his wife. He had risen at 5:30 a.m. to prepare coffee and breakfast for the travelers, wanting to ensure they started their journey with full stomachs and properly caffeinated brains. As he kissed Margaret goodbye and helped her load her suitcase into the van, he reminded her to call when they reached each state line, a promise she would never be able to keep. Sarah Manning's parents, Tom and Beverly, stood beside the van, looking equal parts proud and anxious as they watched their only child prepare for her first real adventure beyond the Kansas border. Beverly had packed extra snacks and a thermos of homemade lemonade, fussing over her daughter like a mother hen, despite Sarah's gentle protests that she was perfectly capable of taking care of herself. Tom had slipped a $50 bill into his daughter's purse for emergencies, money the family could barely afford, but that he insisted she take just in case. Even Florence Murphy's great-grandchildren had woken up early to wave goodbye to their beloved Nana Flo, who, despite her 81 years, had insisted on making the trip to California. Her family had expressed concerns about the long journey and the summer heat, but Florence had dismissed their worries with the characteristic determination that had carried her through 8 decades of Kansas living. "The good Lord has kept me healthy this long," she had told them. "I'm not going to miss this opportunity because of a little car ride." The choir members loaded their suitcases, garment bags containing their matching burgundy robes, and a cooler filled with sandwiches and cold drinks into the back of the white 1979 Ford Econoline van. David Kowalski had spent the previous evening making final checks of the vehicle's mechanical systems, and he was confident that it would handle the journey without problems. The van had over 150,000 miles on the odometer, but it had been well maintained and was mechanically sound despite its age and somewhat tired appearance. Pastor Hartley conducted a brief prayer circle in the parking lot, the same ritual they had performed countless times before rehearsals and performances, but this time felt charged with special significance. They stood in the humid morning air, holding hands and bowing their heads, as their pastor asked for divine protection during their travels and blessing on their upcoming performance. The prayer was interrupted briefly by the sound of a train whistle in the distance, a reminder of the other modes of transportation that had once carried Americans across the vast distances of their continent. "Heavenly Father," Pastor Hartley began, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air, "we thank you for this incredible opportunity you have placed before us. We ask for your protection as we travel across this great country, for wisdom in our decisions, and for voices that will honor you when we perform in California. Help us to remember that we are not just representing ourselves, but our church, our community, and our faith. May our music touch hearts and change lives, just as you have touched and changed ours." The prayer continued for several minutes, with Pastor Hartley asking for specific blessings on each aspect of their journey. He prayed for the mechanical reliability of their vehicle, for favorable weather conditions, for safe highways free from accidents and construction delays. He prayed for their performance, asking that their voices would blend in perfect harmony and that their message would reach the hearts of their listeners. Most importantly, he prayed for their safe return to Millfield, where their families and church community would be waiting to hear about their California adventure. At 6:23 a.m., according to multiple witnesses, the white Ford Econoline van pulled out of the Harmony Baptist Church parking lot and headed west toward Route 66. Pastor Hartley was behind the wheel, with Dr. Hendricks riding shotgun, and the other 10 choir members distributed throughout the van's bench seats and captain's chairs. The van's license plate number was KS4477HC, and painted on both sides in gold letters were the words, "Harmony Baptist Church, Millfield, Kansas." The vehicle was distinctive enough that it should have been easily remembered by anyone who saw it along their route. As the van disappeared around the corner onto Main Street, heading toward the highway that would take them west, the families and friends who had gathered to see them off felt a mixture of pride and melancholy. They were proud of their choir's accomplishment and excited about the opportunity that lay ahead, but they also felt a natural sadness at the temporary separation from people they loved. None of them could have imagined that they were watching their family members and friends disappear forever into the American heartland. The initial plan called for the choir to drive straight through to California with minimal stops, sharing driving duties among the licensed drivers in the group and pausing only for gas, food, and necessary rest breaks. They had mapped out a route that would take them through Oklahoma City, Amarillo, Albuquerque, Flagstaff, and Barstow, following the historic path of Route 66 that had carried millions of Americans toward new opportunities in the West. The total driving time was estimated at 20 hours, which would put them in Barstow by early Saturday evening, with plenty of time to rest before their Sunday performance. The van was equipped with a CB radio that David Kowalski had installed the previous week, allowing them to communicate with truck drivers and other travelers who might have information about road conditions, weather, or interesting stops along the way. Pastor Hartley had also prepared a detailed itinerary with contact information for every planned stop, emergency numbers for medical facilities along their route, and backup plans in case of mechanical problems or unexpected delays. For the first 100 miles of their journey, everything proceeded exactly according to plan. The van ran smoothly, the weather was clear, and the choir members were in high spirits as they watched the Kansas landscape roll past their windows. They sang hymns and gospel songs to pass the time, their voices blending in the confined space of the van just as beautifully as they did in the church sanctuary. Margaret Chen's soprano soared above the engine noise, while David Kowalski's bass provided a rhythmic foundation that seemed to match the cadence of the tires on the highway. Sarah Manning had brought a notebook and was documenting the journey, writing down observations about the changing landscape, interesting roadside attractions, and the dynamics of their group as they settled into the rhythm of long-distance travel. Her entries from those first few hours reveal a young woman filled with excitement and anticipation, eager to experience everything the journey had to offer, and determined to capture every detail for posterity. "Mile 67, she wrote, just passed through Dodge City. Mr. Kowalski pointed out the Boot Hill Museum and told us stories about the old cattle drives. Mrs. Murphy says her grandfather once worked as a cowboy on one of those drives before he settled down to farm. Amazing to think that all this history happened right here where we're driving. Pastor Hartley says we should remember that we're following the same route that carried the Joad family in The Grapes of Wrath, though we're going for much happier reasons." The choir's last confirmed sighting occurred at a gas station in Dodge City, Kansas, where they stopped to fuel up and use the restrooms before continuing west into Oklahoma. The station attendant, a 19-year-old college student named Kevin Walsh, later told investigators that the group had seemed happy and excited, talking about their upcoming performance in California and taking pictures of each other beside historical markers. Walsh remembered the distinctive gold lettering on the van and the friendly conversation he had with Pastor Hartley about the best route to take through Oklahoma. "They seemed like really nice people," Walsh told the Kansas State Police during one of many interviews conducted after the disappearance was reported. "The pastor asked me about road conditions ahead, and I told him everything looked good all the way to the state line. The older lady bought some postcards, and the young girl asked me about colleges in California. They were just normal folks on a road trip, nothing strange or suspicious about them at all." That gas station receipt, time-stamped at 9:47 a.m. on July 15, 1983, would be the last piece of physical evidence confirming the Harmony Baptist Church Choir's location. After leaving Dodge City, the van and its 12 occupants seemed to vanish into the vast expanse of the American highway system, leaving behind no trace of their passage except the memories of family members and friends who had watched them drive away that sunny Friday morning. The first sign that something was wrong came on Sunday evening when Pastor Hartley failed to call his wife, Ruth, as planned. He was supposed to check in after they arrived at the Desert Inn Motel in Barstow, confirming their safe arrival and providing details about their accommodations and the next day's performance schedule. Ruth had been waiting by the phone since 8 p.m. Pacific time, growing increasingly anxious as the hours passed without word from her husband. Ruth Hartley was a patient woman, accustomed to the unpredictable nature of highway travel and the delays that could affect even the best planned journeys. She told herself that they had probably encountered traffic or stopped for a longer dinner break, or were dealing with minor mechanical problems that would delay their arrival by a few hours. But by midnight, when she still hadn't heard from William, her worry had transformed into genuine fear that something serious had happened to the choir. Unable to sleep, Ruth spent the night calling motels along the planned route, hoping to discover that the group had stopped for an unscheduled rest or had been delayed by circumstances beyond their control. She called the Desert Inn Motel in Barstow first, learning that the Harmony Baptist Church Choir had never checked in and that their reserved rooms were still waiting for them. The desk clerk was sympathetic, but could offer no information about what might have delayed the group's arrival. Ruth then began working backward along their planned route, calling motels in Flagstaff, Albuquerque, Amarillo, and Oklahoma City, hoping to find some trace of her husband and the other choir members. Each call brought the same disappointing news. No one matching their description had checked in, and no one had seen a white Ford van with Kansas plates and gold church lettering. It was as if the group had simply ceased to exist somewhere between Kansas and California. By dawn on Monday morning, Ruth knew that something terrible had happened. William had never failed to call when he had promised to do so, and the other choir members were equally responsible people who would have contacted their families if they had encountered any problems. Ruth called the Millfield Police Department and reported the choir as missing, setting in motion an investigation that would span multiple states and involve dozens of law enforcement agencies over the next several months. Police Chief Harold Brennan of the Millfield Police Department was a 20-year veteran of small-town law enforcement, but he had never dealt with anything approaching the complexity of 12 missing persons across multiple state jurisdictions. His department consisted of himself and 2 part-time officers, and their usual responsibilities involved traffic violations, domestic disputes, and the occasional burglary or vandalism case. The disappearance of the Harmony Baptist Church choir was completely outside his experience and resources. Chief Brennan immediately contacted the Kansas State Police, who took over coordination of the search effort and began reaching out to law enforcement agencies along the choir's planned route. Within hours, police departments in Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California had been alerted to watch for the missing van and its occupants. The FBI was notified and agreed to assist if the case showed evidence of interstate crime, though the initial assumption was that the group had encountered mechanical problems or been involved in an accident in a remote area. The search effort quickly expanded to include civilian volunteers, truckers, and amateur radio operators who monitored highway communications for any mention of the missing choir. The case attracted regional media attention, with newspapers and television stations throughout the Midwest running stories about the missing gospel singers and their planned performance in California. The story had all the elements that captured public attention: ordinary people pursuing their dreams, a mysterious disappearance, and the haunting question of what could have happened to 12 individuals on one of America's most traveled highways. Margaret Chen's husband, Robert, took a leave of absence from his teaching position and drove the entire Route 66 corridor himself, stopping at every gas station, restaurant, and motel along the way to show photographs of his wife and ask if anyone remembered seeing the choir. He covered over 3,000 miles in a week, following leads that ultimately led nowhere and growing more desperate with each passing day. The photograph he carried showed Margaret in her burgundy choir robe, smiling at the camera after a particularly successful performance, her eyes bright with the joy she found in music and community. Sarah Manning's parents, Tom and Beverly, appeared on national television programs, pleading for any information about their daughter and her fellow choir members. Beverly Manning's tearful appeals touched viewers across the country, and the family received hundreds of calls from people claiming to have seen the missing group. Each lead was carefully investigated by authorities, but none provided credible evidence of what had happened to the Harmony Baptist Church choir after they left Dodge City on that Friday morning in July. The search effort was unprecedented in scope and intensity, involving helicopters, ground crews, and sophisticated communications equipment that represented the cutting edge of 1983 technology. Searchers combed every mile of Route 66 between Kansas and California, looking for any sign of the missing van or its occupants. They checked rest areas, abandoned buildings, remote side roads, and desert washes where a vehicle might have ended up after leaving the highway. They interviewed gas station attendants, restaurant workers, motel clerks, and truck drivers who regularly traveled the route. Despite these exhaustive efforts, investigators found absolutely no trace of the Harmony Baptist Church choir after their confirmed stop in Dodge City. It was as if the van and all 12 occupants had simply vanished into thin air somewhere along the 200-mile stretch of highway between Kansas and California. There were no credible sightings, no abandoned vehicles, no accident reports, and no evidence of foul play. The complete absence of any clues was more disturbing than any evidence of tragedy would have been, because it suggested something far more sinister than a simple accident or mechanical failure. As weeks turned into months, the active investigation began to wind down due to lack of leads and the enormous cost of maintaining search operations across multiple states. The missing persons cases remained officially open, but detectives were reassigned to more active investigations with better prospects for resolution. The families continued their private searches and hired investigators, but professional law enforcement agencies gradually shifted their attention to cases where evidence provided some hope of success. The most frustrating aspect of the investigation was the complete lack of physical evidence. 12 people and a large van don't simply disappear without leaving some trace of their passage, especially on highways that are heavily traveled and constantly monitored by commercial and law enforcement vehicles. Investigators theorized that the choir might have been victims of a serial killer who operated along America's highway system, but no known predator had ever been linked to crimes involving so many victims simultaneously. Other theories suggested that the group might have encountered a natural disaster that concealed their fate, such as a flash flood in one of the desert washes that cross Route 66 in the southwestern states. However, weather records showed clear skies and no precipitation along the entire route during the weekend of their disappearance. Some investigators wondered if the choir might have deliberately disappeared for reasons known only to themselves. But this theory was quickly dismissed by anyone who knew the individuals involved and understood their deep roots in their Kansas community. The most exotic theories involved everything from alien abduction to government conspiracies. But these speculations only served to trivialize the real tragedy of 12 missing human beings and the families who continued to search for answers. The truth was that no one had any credible explanation for how an entire church choir could vanish without a trace on one of America's most traveled highways, and the mystery only deepened as time passed without resolution. Florence Murphy's great-grandson, Tommy, was 8 years old when his beloved Nana Flo disappeared with the choir. Years later, as an adult, he would become obsessed with solving the mystery that had haunted his family for decades. Tommy spent his vacation time driving Route 66, visiting archives, interviewing retired investigators, and following up on leads that others had abandoned. His dedication to finding answers about his great-grandmother's fate represented the enduring pain that the disappearance had caused for all the families involved. The case began to take on an almost supernatural quality in the public imagination, joining the ranks of famous unsolved mysteries like the disappearance of Amelia Earhart or the fate of the lost colony of Roanoke. How do 12 people simply vanish without a trace on one of America's most traveled highways? The question haunted investigators, family members, and amateur sleuths who became fascinated by the case and its apparently impossible circumstances. By the end of 1983, the Harmony Baptist Church choir disappearance had become part of Route 66 folklore, a cautionary tale told around truck stop coffee counters and campfires about the dangers that might lurk along America's most famous highway. Truckers developed their own theories about what had happened to the missing singers, and some claimed to have encountered strange phenomena along the same stretch of road where the choir had vanished. These stories only added to the mystery and mythology surrounding the case. The choir's planned performance at the Gospel Festival in Barstow was cancelled, of course, but the festival organizers dedicated their Sunday evening program to the missing singers. choirs from across the country performed hymns that the Harmony Baptist Church Choir had been known for, and the event concluded with a moving rendition of Amazing Grace, performed by a combined choir of over 200 voices. The performance was broadcast on Christian radio networks throughout the western states, reaching audiences who had never heard of Millfield, Kansas, but who were moved by the story of the missing gospel singers. The Harmony Baptist Church in Millfield struggled to continue without its beloved choir and pastor. The congregation dwindled as members found it too painful to attend services that reminded them of their missing friends and spiritual leader. The church building itself seemed to echo with the memory of voices that would never again fill its sanctuary with music, and many found it impossible to sing familiar hymns without thinking of the 12 people who had brought those songs to life with such beauty and power. Ruth Hartley eventually moved away from Millfield, unable to bear the constant reminders of her missing husband and the life they had built together in the small Kansas town. She left behind a house full of memories and a community that had been forever changed by the tragedy of their missing choir. Other family members also relocated, seeking fresh starts in places where they wouldn't be constantly reminded of their loss and the unanswered questions that surrounded it. The case files grew thick with reports, interviews, and investigative summaries, but they contained no answers, only documentation of the exhaustive efforts that had failed to locate any trace of the missing choir. Detectives who worked the case would later describe it as the most frustrating investigation of their careers, a mystery that seemed to mock their professional expertise and the sophisticated investigative techniques at their disposal. As the years passed, the Harmony Baptist Church Choir disappearance became a cold case, periodically reviewed when new investigators took over or when advances in technology offered fresh possibilities for analysis. DNA databases, improved communication systems, and computer networks that could cross-reference information from multiple jurisdictions all raised hopes that the mystery might finally be solved. But none of these technological advances provided the breakthrough that families had been hoping for. The missing persons files were transferred from active investigation to cold case status, joining thousands of other unsolved disappearances in archives across the country. The families never stopped hoping for answers, but they gradually accepted that they might never learn what happened to their loved ones during that scorching weekend in July 1983. The pain of not knowing was in many ways worse than the grief of confirmed death, because it left no possibility for closure or resolution. Amateur investigators and true crime enthusiasts periodically took up the case, convinced that fresh eyes and new approaches might succeed where professional law enforcement had failed. Some of these amateur sleuths brought valuable insights and energy to the investigation, but none uncovered evidence that had been overlooked by the original investigators. The mystery remained as impenetrable as ever, a puzzle with missing pieces that seemed impossible to locate or replace. The story of the Harmony Baptist Church Choir became the subject of books, documentaries, and television programs that explored America's most baffling unsolved mysteries. Each new treatment of the case brought renewed attention and fresh theories, but none provided the concrete evidence needed to solve the mystery of what happened to 12 people who set out from Kansas, bound for California, and simply vanished along the way. The case might have remained forever unsolved, another tragic footnote in the annals of American highway mysteries, if not for a routine construction project that began 20 years after the choir's disappearance. Murphy's gas station in Amarillo, Texas, had been serving Route 66 travelers since 1967, providing fuel, food, and basic services to the thousands of people who passed through on their way to destinations across the American West. The station sat at mile marker 247, a location that would prove to have sinister significance in the story of the missing choir. Murphy's gas station was a typical roadside business of its era, featuring 2 sets of gas pumps, a small convenience store stocked with snacks and beverages, and a single-bay garage where minor repairs could be performed on vehicles that developed problems while traveling. The station was owned and operated by the Murphy family, Irish immigrants who had come to Texas in the 1950s seeking opportunities in the booming post-war economy. Patrick Murphy Sr. had built the business from nothing, working 18-hour days to establish a reputation for honest dealing and reliable service among the truckers and tourists who formed his customer base. By 2003, the station was being run by Patrick's son, Tom Murphy Jr., who had grown up around the business and inherited both his father's work ethic and his commitment to serving the traveling public. The elder Murphy had passed away in 1998, taking with him decades of memories about the people and events that had shaped the history of his roadside business. Tom Jr. had continued operating the station much as his father had, maintaining the same high standards of service while gradually updating equipment and facilities to meet changing customer expectations. The decision to undertake a major renovation of Murphy's gas station was driven by both practical necessity and regulatory requirements. The underground fuel storage tanks were nearing the end of their useful life and needed to be replaced to meet environmental standards. The concrete floors in the garage and convenience store were cracking and settling, creating potential safety hazards and aesthetic problems that detracted from the business's professional appearance. The electrical and plumbing systems required updating to accommodate modern equipment and meet current building codes. Tom Murphy Jr. hired Consolidated Construction Company out of Oklahoma City to handle the renovation project, selecting them based on their experience with similar projects and their reputation for quality work. The company was owned by Jake Williams, a third-generation contractor whose family had been building roads, bridges, and commercial structures throughout the Southwest since the 1920s. Williams had personally supervised dozens of gas station renovations and understood the unique challenges involved in upgrading facilities that had to remain operational during construction. The renovation project began in early March 2003, with workers starting the complex process of removing old equipment and preparing the site for new infrastructure. The most challenging aspect of the project involved excavating the old underground storage tanks and installing new ones that met current environmental standards. This work required careful coordination with utility companies, environmental specialists, and regulatory agencies to ensure that all phases of the project complied with applicable laws and regulations. The construction crew began by breaking up the concrete floor in the garage bay, using jackhammers and pneumatic tools to remove the thick slabs that had been poured decades earlier. It was back-breaking work in the Texas heat, made more difficult by the confined space and the constant noise of heavy equipment. The workers were experienced in this type of demolition, but they approached the task methodically, checking for underground utilities and other potential hazards before proceeding with each phase of the excavation. On the morning of March 15, 2003, exactly 20 years and 8 months after the Harmony Baptist Church choir disappeared, construction foreman Jake Williams was operating a concrete saw when his blade encountered something unexpected beneath the garage floor. Instead of cutting through solid earth as expected, the saw had sliced into what appeared to be a wooden surface hidden beneath the concrete. Williams immediately shut down his equipment and called Tom Murphy Jr. over to examine the unusual discovery. What they found beneath that garage floor would reopen one of Route 66's most notorious cold cases and provide the first concrete evidence about the fate of the missing choir in 2 decades. The wooden surface turned out to be a trapdoor, approximately 4 feet by 6 feet, constructed from heavy oak planks and secured with rusted metal hinges. The door was flush with the ground and had been completely concealed by the concrete floor that had been poured over it sometime in the early 1980s. Tom Murphy Jr. stared at the hidden trapdoor in disbelief, trying to understand how such a feature could exist beneath his family's business without his knowledge. He had worked at the station since he was a teenager, helping his father with everything from pumping gas to performing minor repairs, and he had never seen or heard any mention of an underground space beneath the garage. His father had been meticulous about maintaining records of all improvements and modifications to the property, but there was no documentation of any underground construction project. The discovery of the trapdoor raised immediate questions about its purpose and the circumstances of its construction. Who had built this underground space, and why had it been concealed beneath the garage floor? When had the concrete been poured over it, and what had prompted someone to hide its existence so thoroughly? Tom Murphy Jr. knew that he needed to contact authorities before proceeding with any further excavation, both to ensure compliance with local regulations and to investigate what might be a significant archaeological or historical find. The Amarillo Police Department responded to Tom Murphy's call within 30 minutes, sending Detective Ray Castellanos to examine the discovery and determine what steps should be taken next. Castellanos was a 15-year veteran of the force, with experience in everything from routine traffic accidents to complex criminal investigations, but he had never encountered anything quite like the hidden chamber beneath Murphy's gas station. His first priority was ensuring the safety of the construction workers and determining whether the underground space posed any immediate hazards. Detective Castellanos examined the wooden trapdoor carefully, noting its construction details and the apparent age of the materials. The oak planks were weathered and darkened with age, and the metal hinges showed significant rust that suggested they had been in place for many years. The concrete that had concealed the door appeared to be the same age and composition as the rest of the garage floor, indicating that the chamber had been sealed sometime during the original construction or a subsequent renovation project. The detective's experience with criminal investigations made him cautious about proceeding without proper precautions and documentation. Underground spaces could contain hazardous materials, structural instabilities, or evidence related to criminal activities that required specialized handling. He contacted the Texas Rangers and the FBI to report the discovery and request assistance in determining the appropriate investigative protocol for examining the hidden chamber. Within hours, Murphy's gas station had been transformed into an active crime scene, with yellow tape cordoning off the garage area and teams of specialists arriving to assess the situation. Environmental experts tested the air quality in the underground space to ensure it was safe for human entry. Structural engineers examined the chamber's construction to determine its stability and load-bearing capacity. Crime scene technicians prepared to document every detail of the space and its contents using photography, measurements, and evidence collection protocols. The decision to open the hidden chamber was made carefully, with all appropriate safety measures in place and emergency personnel standing by in case of complications. Tom Murphy Jr. was allowed to observe the process, but the actual work was performed by law enforcement specialists who had experience with similar situations. The rusted hinges protested as the heavy wooden door was slowly raised, revealing a set of wooden steps that descended into darkness below. The underground chamber was larger than anyone had expected, measuring approximately 12 feet by 20 feet, with concrete walls and a ceiling supported by steel beams. The construction quality was substantial, suggesting that whoever had built this space had intended it for long-term use rather than temporary storage. The chamber appeared to have been excavated by hand and reinforced with materials that would have been readily available in the early 1980s when the concrete floor above had been poured. As investigators descended into the chamber with powerful flashlights and portable lighting equipment, they began to comprehend the magnitude of what they had discovered. This wasn't simply an old storage room or forgotten utility space. The chamber had been deliberately designed and constructed as a living area, complete with amenities that suggested it had been intended to house multiple people for extended periods. The implications of this discovery sent chills through everyone present as they began to understand what they might have found. The underground space had been converted into a makeshift living area that defied rational explanation. 12 sleeping bags were arranged around the perimeter of the chamber, each positioned on a simple wooden platform that elevated it slightly above the concrete floor. The sleeping bags showed signs of use, with indentations and wear patterns that indicated they had been occupied for several days, or possibly longer. Near each sleeping area were personal belongings that would prove to be crucial evidence in solving one of America's most baffling missing persons cases. Cases of canned food were stacked along one wall of the chamber, including beans, soup, vegetables, and other non-perishable items that could sustain multiple people for an extended period. Most of the cans had been opened and consumed, leaving behind empty containers that provided clues about how long the chamber had been occupied and how many people had been confined there. Plastic jugs that had once contained water were scattered throughout the space, along with paper plates, plastic utensils, and other disposable items that suggested meals had been prepared and consumed in the underground room. A chemical toilet had been installed in one corner of the chamber, providing basic sanitary facilities for the people who had been held there. The toilet showed evidence of regular use, and its presence indicated that whoever had constructed this prison had planned for long-term confinement of multiple individuals. Nearby, investigators found bottles of disinfectant and toilet paper, supplies that would have been necessary for maintaining basic hygiene in the confined space. Perhaps most disturbing was the battery-powered radio that sat on a makeshift shelf carved into the concrete wall. The radio was still functional, though its batteries had long since died, and it was tuned to a gospel music station that had been broadcasting from Lubbock, Texas in the 1980s. The significance of this detail would become clear as investigators began to piece together the evidence and realize what they had discovered in the hidden chamber beneath Murphy's gas station. Personal belongings were scattered throughout the underground space, providing the first concrete evidence about the identity of the people who had been held prisoner there. Margaret Chen's purse was found near one of the sleeping areas, its contents remarkably well preserved, despite 20 years in the underground environment. Her driver's license was still clearly legible, showing her photograph and identifying her as a resident of Millfield, Kansas. Family photos tucked into her wallet showed her husband, Robert, and other relatives, images that had undoubtedly provided comfort during her final days. David Kowalski's toolkit was discovered near another sleeping area, the familiar implements of his trade that he had apparently been carrying when he was abducted, along with the rest of the choir. The tools were high-quality items that any mechanic would have been reluctant to leave behind, and their presence in the underground chamber suggested that the choir members had been taken captive, along with their personal belongings, rather than being separated from their possessions during whatever ordeal had befallen them. Sarah Manning's diary was perhaps the most significant piece of evidence found in the chamber, providing a first-hand account of the choir's final days and the circumstances of their captivity. The diary was a simple, spiral-bound notebook that the 17-year-old had been using to document their California trip, but the final entries revealed a nightmare that no one could have imagined when she began writing about their departure from Kansas. The diary's early entries were filled with the excitement and anticipation of a young woman experiencing her first major adventure away from home. Sarah had written detailed descriptions of the landscape they passed through, amusing observations about her fellow choir members, and speculation about what their performance in California would be like. Her writing style was engaging and perceptive, revealing the intelligence and curiosity that had made her such a promising student and budding journalist. But as investigators read through the diary's later entries, the tone became increasingly dark and desperate. The handwriting grew shakier with each entry, reflecting the physical and emotional stress that Sarah was experiencing as their captivity continued. The final entries provided crucial information about their captor and the circumstances of their imprisonment, details that would prove essential in understanding what had happened to the Harmony Baptist Church Choir during those final days in July 1983. July 16th, one entry read, "The man with kind eyes brought us more food today. He says we're safe here, that he's protecting us from something terrible that's going to happen on the highway. Pastor Hartley keeps asking questions, but the man won't explain what he means. Mrs. Murphy is taking this better than the rest of us. She says the Lord will provide a way out, but I'm starting to wonder if God can hear us down here." Another entry, dated July 17th, provided more disturbing details. "We missed our performance today. I keep thinking about all the people in California who were expecting to hear us sing, and about our families back home who must be worried sick. The man comes down twice a day to bring food and empty the toilet, but he won't tell us why we're here or when he's going to let us go. Mr. Kowalski tried to rush him yesterday, but the man had a gun. He didn't point it at us, just showed it to make sure we understood that escape wasn't an option." The most chilling entry was dated July 18th, 1983, 3 days after the choir had disappeared from the parking lot of the Harmony Baptist Church in Millfield, Kansas. "He says we're going on another trip tomorrow. Pastor Hartley keeps praying, but I don't think God can hear us down here. The man seems sad about something, like he doesn't want to do whatever he's planning, but doesn't have a choice. If someone finds this, tell my parents I love them. Tell them I wasn't afraid at the end, even though that's not really true." That final entry was the last evidence of Sarah Manning's life and of the lives of her 11 fellow choir members who had shared her underground prison during those terrifying final days in July 1983. The diary ended abruptly, with no indication of what had happened to the choir members after July 18th, or where their captor had taken them on the trip that Sarah had written about with such obvious dread. Florence Murphy's hymnal was discovered near the sleeping area that had apparently been hers during the choir's captivity. The book was opened to page 127, "Amazing Grace," and contained handwritten notes in the margins that appeared to be some kind of countdown or calendar system. The elderly woman had apparently been marking off the days of their imprisonment, creating a record of their captivity that supplemented the information provided by Sarah Manning's diary. The hymnal's margins contained other notations that provided insights into Florence's state of mind during those final days. Biblical verses were written in her careful handwriting, along with brief prayers and messages of hope that she had apparently used to sustain herself during the ordeal. One notation read, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," followed by the date July 17th and a simple question mark, as if Florence was struggling to maintain her faith in the face of their desperate circumstances. Other personal belongings found in the chamber included clothing, medication, and small mementos that the choir members had brought with them on what was supposed to be a celebratory trip to California. Dr. Hendrick's medical bag was present, along with prescription medications that several choir members had been taking for various health conditions. The presence of these items suggested that the choir members had been abducted along with their luggage, rather than being separated from their possessions during the initial kidnapping. James Butler's insurance papers were found in a briefcase that had apparently been with him when the choir was taken captive. The papers included policy documents, claim forms, and business correspondence that painted a picture of a man who had been trying to rebuild his life after a difficult divorce. Among his personal effects was a letter from his ex-wife in Chicago, apparently written shortly before the choir's departure for California, in which she expressed regret about their failed marriage and hope that he was finding happiness in his new life in Kansas. Ruth Stevenson's reading glasses were discovered near one of the sleeping areas, along with a paperback novel that she had apparently been reading during the journey. The book was a romance novel set in the Old West, an escape into fiction that had probably provided some distraction from the horror of their real-life situation. The bookmark was positioned about halfway through the story, suggesting that Ruth had continued reading even while held captive, perhaps as a way of maintaining some sense of normalcy in their abnormal circumstances. Thomas and Eleanor Gray's belongings were found together, including Thomas's farmer's almanac and Eleanor's knitting supplies. The almanac was filled with notes about planting schedules, weather patterns, and agricultural prices, the concerns of a man whose life had been shaped by the rhythms of rural farming. Eleanor's knitting needles and yarn suggested that she had been working on a project during their captivity, perhaps as a way of keeping her hands busy and her mind occupied during the long hours of confinement. Michael Rodriguez's Spanish-English dictionary was among the items recovered from the chamber, along with lesson plans for his high school classes that he had apparently been reviewing during the trip. The presence of these materials suggested that Michael had been thinking about his teaching responsibilities even while traveling to California, demonstrating the dedication to his profession that had made him such an effective educator despite his youth and relative inexperience. Patricia Williams' nurse's bag contained medical supplies and equipment that would have been valuable in treating any injuries or health problems that arose during their captivity. The bag's contents had apparently been used, with some supplies missing and others showing signs of recent use. This evidence suggested that Patricia had continued to provide medical care for her fellow choir members even while they were being held prisoner, maintaining her professional responsibilities under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. The discovery of these personal belongings provided concrete proof that the Harmony Baptist Church choir had indeed been held in the underground chamber beneath Murphy's gas station. But it raised even more disturbing questions about what had happened to them after their captivity ended. The absence of human remains in the chamber suggested that the choir members had been removed from their prison, either alive or dead, and taken somewhere else for reasons that remained unclear. Forensic specialists spent days examining every inch of the underground chamber, collecting evidence and documenting details that might provide clues about the choir's captor and the circumstances of their imprisonment. Fingerprints were lifted from surfaces throughout the chamber, though most were too degraded after 20 years to be useful for identification purposes. DNA samples were collected from hair strands, clothing fibers, and other biological materials that might eventually be matched against databases or compared with samples from family members. The chamber's construction provided additional clues about the planning and resources that had gone into creating this underground prison. The concrete work was professional quality, suggesting that whoever had built the chamber had experience with construction projects or access to skilled workers. The steel beams that supported the ceiling were heavy-duty materials that would have been expensive and difficult to install without specialized equipment. The electrical wiring that powered the chamber's lighting system was professionally installed and connected to the gas station's main electrical panel. These construction details suggested that the chamber had been built by someone with significant financial resources and technical expertise, not by a casual criminal acting on impulse. The project would have required months of planning and preparation, along with the ability to purchase materials and perform construction work without attracting unwanted attention. The fact that the chamber had been concealed beneath the garage floor indicated that whoever built it had legitimate access to the gas station property and the ability to control the timing of construction activities. The investigation expanded to include a thorough examination of Murphy's gas station's history and ownership records, looking for any connections between the property and the missing choir. Tom Murphy, Jr. was extensively interviewed about his family's business, his father's activities during the 1980s, and any unusual events or construction projects that might have occurred around the time of the choir's disappearance. The elder Murphy's death in 1998 meant that the person most likely to have knowledge about the chamber's construction was no longer available for questioning. Property records showed that Patrick Murphy Sr. had owned the gas station continuously since 1967, with no significant changes in ownership or management during the relevant time period. Building permits and inspection records from the early 1980s showed routine maintenance and upgrading projects, but nothing that would have involved the extensive excavation required to build the underground chamber. This suggested that the construction had been done without proper permits or official oversight, adding to the mystery of how such a substantial project could have been completed without detection. Financial records from the gas station showed normal business operations during the 1980s, with no unusual expenses or cash transactions that might have been related to the chamber's construction. Patrick Murphy Sr. had apparently maintained detailed books for tax and business purposes, but these records contain no references to underground construction or any expenditures that couldn't be accounted for by normal business operations. This suggested that either the chamber had been built by someone else or that Murphy Sr. had been extremely careful to conceal the true nature of his activities. The investigation also focused on identifying the man with kind eyes that Sarah Manning had described in her diary. This individual was clearly the key to understanding what had happened to the choir, but 20 years had passed since their disappearance, and there were no obvious suspects or leads to pursue. The description provided by Sarah was too general to be useful for identification purposes, and none of the other evidence found in the chamber provided clear indications about the captor's identity or motivations. Investigators reviewed hundreds of cold cases from the 1980s, looking for similar crimes or patterns that might be connected to the choir's disappearance. They examined files related to serial killers who had operated along highway corridors during that time period. But none of the known predators had been linked to crimes involving multiple victims or underground imprisonment. The scale and sophistication of the operation suggested that this wasn't the work of a typical serial killer, but rather someone with specific motivations and extensive resources. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was brought in to develop a psychological profile of the choir's captor based on the evidence found in the underground chamber. The profile suggested an individual who was organized, methodical, and capable of long-term planning. The relatively humane conditions in the chamber, including adequate food, water, and sanitary facilities, suggested someone who didn't take pleasure in causing unnecessary suffering, but who was willing to commit serious crimes to achieve his goals. The profilers noted that the captor had apparently interacted with his prisoners regularly, bringing food and maintaining the facilities in the chamber. This suggested someone who was comfortable with personal contact and who might have attempted to justify his actions to his victims. The reference to protecting the choir from something terrible that was going to happen on the highway suggested delusional thinking or knowledge of some specific threat that existed in the captor's mind. The timing of the choir's disappearance was also significant, occurring during a weekend when the gas station would have been busy with travelers, and the underground chamber would have been most vulnerable to discovery. This suggested that the captor was either extremely confident in his security measures or that he had compelling reasons for acting when he did, regardless of the risks involved. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the discovery of the underground chamber had answered some questions about the fate of the Harmony Baptist Church choir while raising many others. The evidence proved conclusively that the 12 singers had been held prisoner beneath Murphy's gas station for at least 3 days in July 1983, but it provided no clues about what had happened to them after they were removed from the chamber or where their remains might be located. The case attracted renewed media attention as news of the chamber's discovery spread throughout the country. Family members who had waited 20 years for answers found themselves dealing with a fresh wave of grief and hope as they learned about the evidence that had been uncovered. The confirmation that their loved ones had been victims of a deliberate crime was both devastating and oddly comforting, providing some explanation for their disappearance while raising new questions about their ultimate fate. Margaret Chen's husband, Robert, now in his 70s and retired from teaching, traveled to Amarillo to see the chamber where his wife had spent her final days. Standing in the underground room where Margaret had been held prisoner, surrounded by her personal belongings and the evidence of her suffering, Robert experienced a complex mixture of emotions that he struggled to put into words. "At least now I know she didn't die in a car accident," he told reporters. "She was murdered, but she died knowing that I loved her and that I would never stop looking for her." Sarah Manning's parents, Tom and Beverly, had both passed away during the 20 years since their daughter's disappearance, dying without ever learning what had happened to her. Their surviving relatives found some comfort in finally having answers about Sarah's fate, but the details revealed by her diary entries were almost too painful to bear. The image of their vibrant, talented daughter spending her final days in an underground prison, writing desperate messages that she hoped someone would eventually find, was a nightmare that no family should have to endure. Florence Murphy's great-grandson Tommy, who had spent years investigating the choir's disappearance, felt vindicated by the discovery of evidence that confirmed his suspicions about foul play. But the revelation that his beloved great-grandmother had been held prisoner in such horrific conditions was devastating for someone who remembered her as a source of comfort and strength during his own childhood. The hymnal, with her handwritten prayers and calendar markings, became a treasured family heirloom, a final connection to a woman whose faith had sustained her even in her darkest hours. The other families experienced similar mixtures of relief and renewed grief as they learned details about their loved ones' final days. The personal belongings found in the chamber provided tangible connections to people they had lost 20 years earlier, but they also served as reminders of the suffering those people had endured before their deaths. The knowledge that their family members had been victims of a deliberate crime rather than an accident provided some answers, but it also raised disturbing questions about the nature of evil and the vulnerability of innocent people to predators who lurk in society's shadows. The investigation continued for months, with law enforcement agencies from multiple states working together to identify the choir's captor and determine what had happened to the singers after they were removed from the underground chamber. Despite extensive efforts, including interviews with hundreds of potential witnesses and exhaustive reviews of evidence from the chamber, investigators were unable to identify the man with kind eyes or locate any trace of the choir member's remains. The case was eventually classified as a cold case homicide, with the files remaining open pending the discovery of new evidence or witnesses. The underground chamber was sealed and the gas station demolished, replaced by a modern travel center that serves thousands of Route 66 travelers every year. Most of them have no idea that they're driving over what was once a prison, where 12 innocent people spent their final days, victims of a crime that remains unsolved despite decades of investigation. The story of the Harmony Baptist Church Choir became a cautionary tale about the dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly normal places and situations. Their disappearance demonstrated that evil can hide behind a friendly facade, and that even the most traveled highways can conceal dark secrets. The choir members' ordeal serves as a reminder that ordinary people living ordinary lives can become victims of extraordinary crimes, and that the search for justice sometimes takes decades to achieve even partial resolution. The families of the missing choir members established a memorial fund in their honor, providing scholarships for young musicians and supporting church music programs throughout Kansas. Their legacy lives on in the voices of new singers who carry forward the tradition of gospel music that meant so much to the 12 people who died in pursuit of their dreams. The scholarship recipients often perform Amazing Grace at memorial services, their young voices echoing the harmonies that the Harmony Baptist Church choir once created with such beauty and power. The case continues to fascinate investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths who believe that solving the mystery might still be possible despite the passage of time. New technologies for analyzing evidence, expanded databases for comparing DNA and fingerprints, and improved communication systems for sharing information between jurisdictions all offer hope that the truth about the choir's fate might eventually be revealed. Someone somewhere knows what happened to 12 people during that scorching weekend in July 1983, and their silence protects a secret that has caused immeasurable pain for the families who continue to search for answers. The underground chamber beneath Murphy's gas station represented only one chapter in a larger story that remains unfinished. The choir members were removed from that prison and taken somewhere else, either to their deaths or to another location where their fate was sealed. Their captor planned and executed a complex crime that involved substantial resources, technical expertise, and knowledge of Route 66's hidden geography. He disappeared as completely as his victims, leaving behind only questions and the haunting image of 12 people who trusted in God's protection, but found themselves trapped in a nightmare that challenged their faith and tested their courage. The discovery of the underground chamber, 20 years after the choir's disappearance, provided partial answers to questions that had haunted investigators and family members for 2 decades. But it also demonstrated that some mysteries run deeper than anyone had imagined, involving levels of planning and deception that challenge our understanding of criminal behavior. The case of the Harmony Baptist Church choir remains one of America's most disturbing unsolved crimes, a reminder that evil can hide in plain sight and that justice sometimes remains frustratingly out of reach despite our best efforts to achieve it. What happened to the Harmony Baptist Church choir after they were removed from their underground prison remains unknown. They may have been murdered and buried somewhere in the vast Texas desert, their remains waiting to be discovered by future construction projects or changes in the landscape. They may have been transported to another location where their captor completed whatever plan had motivated him to commit such an elaborate crime. Or they may have somehow escaped their captor and started new lives under assumed identities, afraid to return to Kansas and put their families in danger. The truth about their fate may never be known, but their story serves as a powerful reminder of the fragility of human life and the importance of cherishing the time we have with the people we love. The Harmony Baptist Church choir set out from Kansas in pursuit of a dream, eager to share their musical gifts with a larger audience and represent their faith and community on a national stage. Instead, they became victims of a crime that defied explanation and challenged our understanding of human nature. Their voices were silenced forever somewhere between Kansas and California, but their memory lives on in the hearts of those who knew them and in the minds of those who continue to search for answers about their fate. The mystery of what happened to 12 gospel singers during that summer weekend in 1983 may never be completely solved, but their story will continue to inspire those who believe that truth and justice are worth pursuing, regardless of the obstacles that stand in the way. The man with kind eyes, as Sarah Manning called him in her diary, was never identified or brought to justice. Whoever he was, he managed to abduct 12 people from a highway without leaving a trace, hold them prisoner for days in an underground chamber, and then make them disappear again without anyone discovering his identity or methods. He may still be alive, possibly responsible for other unsolved disappearances along America's highway system, or he may have taken his secrets to the grave along with his victims. The FBI believes there may be connections between the choir's disappearance and other missing persons cases from the 1980s, but without more concrete evidence, those connections remain purely speculative. The sophistication and scale of the operation that led to the choir's disappearance suggests that this wasn't the work of a first-time offender, but rather someone with experience in abduction and concealment techniques. The underground chamber beneath Murphy's gas station may have been only one of several similar facilities used by the same perpetrator or organization. The case has inspired numerous theories about the motive behind the choir's abduction and murder. Some investigators believe the crime was financially motivated, possibly involving ransom demands that were never made public or insurance fraud schemes that went wrong. Others suggest that the choir members may have witnessed something along their route that made them targets for elimination, or that they were victims of a serial killer who operated differently from typical highway predators. The most disturbing theories involve the possibility that the choir members were abducted for reasons related to their religious beliefs or musical abilities. The reference in Sarah Manning's diary to being protected from something terrible that was going to happen on the highway suggests that their captor may have been operating under delusions about divine missions or prophecies. The chamber's amenities and the captor's apparent attempts to justify his actions to his prisoners support the theory that he viewed himself as a protector rather than a predator. Whatever the motive, the case of the Harmony Baptist Church Choir represents one of the most complex and disturbing crimes in American highway history. The combination of careful planning, technical sophistication, and complete success in concealing evidence makes it unique among unsolved missing persons cases. The discovery of the underground chamber provided crucial evidence about the choir's fate, but it also demonstrated the extraordinary lengths to which their captor was willing to go to achieve his goals. The families of the choir members have found some measure of peace in knowing that their loved ones are together wherever they may be. The strong bonds of faith and friendship that united the singers in life may have provided comfort during their final days, and their shared commitment to using their musical gifts in service of something greater than themselves gave meaning to their lives, even as those lives were cut short by violence and hatred. The legacy of the Harmony Baptist Church Choir extends far beyond the mystery of their disappearance. They represented the best qualities of small-town America: faith, community, dedication to excellence, and the willingness to pursue dreams despite limited resources and opportunities. Their story reminds us that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they work together toward common goals, and that the power of music to unite and inspire transcends the circumstances in which it is created. The 12 voices that once filled a small Kansas church with beautiful harmonies were silenced forever during that terrible weekend in July 1983. But their memory continues to inspire new generations of singers and believers. Their sacrifice serves as a reminder that evil exists in the world, but that faith, hope, and love are stronger than the darkness that seeks to destroy them. The mystery of their disappearance may never be completely solved, but their legacy of music, faith, and community will endure long after the last investigator has closed the case files and the last family member has stopped searching for answers. In the end, the story of the Harmony Baptist Church Choir is both a tragedy and a triumph, a tale of lives cut short by violence but lived with purpose and meaning. They died as they had lived, together and united in their faith, their voices finally silenced, but their spirits unbroken by the evil that sought to destroy them. Their memory serves as a beacon of hope for all who believe that justice will ultimately prevail, and that love is stronger than hatred, even in the darkest corners of the human experience. The case remains officially unsolved, with investigators continuing to follow up on leads and new evidence as it becomes available. The families hold out hope that advances in forensic science or the discovery of additional evidence might finally provide the answers they have sought for so many years. Until that day comes, the mystery of the Harmony Baptist Church Choir will continue to haunt those who knew them and inspire those who believe that every victim of crime deserves justice. regardless of how much time has passed or how difficult the investigation may be. Their story has become part of American folklore, a reminder that the highways that connect our communities can also conceal terrible secrets, and that the people we pass on our journeys may be carrying burdens we cannot imagine. The next time you drive down a lonely highway or stop at a roadside gas station, remember the 12 singers who set out from Kansas with dreams of sharing their gifts with the world, and who instead became victims of a crime that challenges our understanding of human nature and our faith in justice. What do you think really happened to the Harmony Baptist Church choir after they were removed from that underground chamber? Was it a serial killer, a delusional individual, or something even more sinister? The man with kind eyes Sarah wrote about in her diary was never found. Could he still be alive today? Share your theories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into America's most haunting unsolved mysteries.